You know, a lot of people ask about the various types of deer calls that can be used in the woods. I mean, let's face it, we're all trying to get a deer, a buck, to come in closer range so that we can shoot them. And, you know, throughout the years, I've tried just about everything. Sometimes marketing, and sometimes because it made sense. It just seemed like it made sense. And I'm going to go through some of the calls that I don't use or don't use very often. I'm going to explain why. And I'm going to explain what I think is my #1 deer call that I take into the woods every time I go hunting. And if you're actually looking at this video instead of listening in your truck on the way to work, you might have a major hint of what call I'm going to talk about that I like the most. But going through, you know, whether it's a call or an attractant, I have rattled in a buck with antlers and shot him. The thing about rattling antlers is it's great when you have pinpointed areas of cover and you have mature bucks and you don't have a lot of hunting pressure. When I find bucks that are being rattled in, typically they'll come directly downwind of you or try to circle downwind of you if you can. So if you have a lake, a stream, a deep river, an open marsh, an open field, an open pasture downwind of you, then it can work really well because they can't get downwind of you and they have to come right in. Rattling is a great tactic. What I find though is when you're in high pressure areas, Southwest Wisconsin in general, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Minnesota, portions of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, you know, over Northeast, there's a lot of areas, you know, and I'm talking the majority of whitetail states, and even if you go down in the Southeast, where there's a lot of people rattling. I had a situation where I was sitting with Mike Mansell last year from the Breaking Point. We were hunting, he was filming. We were on a property down around where I hunt right here, and the neighbor just kept rattling and snort wheezing and making a bunch of noise and doe bleats, and the deer that were on our food plots 200 yards away kept staring at him. Well, we got excited at first, yeah, we really did, but you know, after a half hour of some pretty obnoxious calling, those deer not only looked that way, but they ran from that way. And you can really overdo it. I can guarantee if there's any mature buck in there, he would not have gone over there. And in the rattling can be overdone. You know, there's times where mature buck might come in, but again, they're going to circle downwind. If you're hunting brushy country, brushy funnels, near bedding areas, and you're right on top of the bucks, because you're hunting a small parcel, then rattling might not be for you. If you get down into some of the big whitetail states, fantasy land states, I call them, of Iowa, Kansas, might be a lot easier to rattle, because if you spook one buck that's very shy, another one might come its way. Now, snort wheezing. I have to admit I've snort wheezed before with my hand. You know, you're making that noise of two bucks fighting out in the fields, and they're snort wheezing at each other. And I heard that the one time and snort wheeze with my hand, just kind of a, you know, with your hand making that noise. And I had a mature buck come over from the side. He was a very aggressive one, and he came towards me, made a bunch of rubs, a lot of scrapes. He was not those bucks that were fighting out in the field. Came from a different direction, came from a different bedding area. And by the time it got close to dark, he was below me, didn't see him or hear him anymore. I actually got all the way down out of the stand at that point, and he ended up snort wheezing at me when I got down at the bottom, and actually made me kind of nervous because I'm just there with a bow. I actually flashed a light in that direction, and sure enough, he ran away. He was a big buck. Well, he happens to be this buck right here. And the next day, I went into that bedding area. I was going in the stand early in the morning, and he actually ran at me. And I heard something coming at me through the weeds. I shined my light, I had my bow coming in, and it was him, and he turned and just slowly walked away, and he snort wheezed at me. And so I ended up shooting about 3 hours later with some does in the stand that I was walking to, and he was just a very aggressive buck that wanted to die. It's the year before I saw him taking on this buck right here, fighting each other, and this buck was big enough, he's pushing him sideways through the brush, made a bunch of rubs. Very cool story with these bucks. Snort wheezing is great. I love hearing snort wheezing, but I've also had situations where, like this buck, he came in, it was too dark by the time he came in, he was very aggressive. I have other times where they've ran away. And so snort wheeze is a very aggressive posture when it comes to bucks, and if you're taking that stance and calling to that buck, it's very aggressive. And I find if you're hunting 4, 5, 6-year-old bucks, especially in higher pressured areas, that they don't get to that age by being overly aggressive like this one and just charging right in. They're shy bucks, and a lot of times the majority of those bucks, if you snort wheeze, are going to run the other way. So snort wheezing, it might work, especially when you have two fighting out there. I don't think they're going to leave, especially if they have a doe. But interesting how this one was probably coming into the side, and when I snort wheeze, he just came over to me. So, and then shot him the next day, but he's an example of a very aggressive buck. So rattling, snort wheeze, they do have their time and place, but a lot of times in a small parcel, it's not a great fit. Now, doe bleat. What I like about a doe bleat, and I carry about half the time during the rut, you know, whether I bring it or not, I will try it occasionally, but it's kind of more of a Hail Mary. I did call a buck in 2002 with a can call doe bleat, and it came right in, ended up shooting it. And it was a very cool experience. And I think, well, you know, I'm gonna do this every year and it's gonna work every year. Well, that happens to be one of the few bucks I've ever called in with a can call. And I'm not saying they won't come in, but again, if you get in those high pressure states, for one, it's not an aggressive call, which is a good thing. I don't find that you spook a lot of deer with it at all. But sometimes it's not an effective call. So I'll keep it in my hand warmer tube or on me or in one of my pockets when I'm going out. I don't think it's a bad call, but I just haven't had a lot of luck, and obviously there's been some great luck in other spots with it. It's not necessarily a call, but a decoy. I find a decoy is a lot like a snort wheeze. If you're in a Fantasyland state where you have a lot of mature bucks, maybe you're in a big river bottom where deer can see that decoy from 200 yards away, and you have a big wide movement of bucks cruising back and forth. Decoy might be pretty cool because for every one that you might spook that comes in and doesn't like the decoy, you might have another one that loves the decoy. And in those areas where they're low pressure states, obviously, you're going to spook a lot less deer with them. But in areas where there's a lot of hunters and a lot of people trying every trick that they can, everything that they can buy and get sucked into with marketing and advertising, then there's a lot of people using decoys in high pressure areas, and I feel that they spook a lot more deer is what I've found, and hunters that I've been hunting with that have used them than not. And I'm not to say that none of these are going to work, you know, whether it's a can call, rattling, or a decoy, snort wheezing, they all have their time and place, but that doesn't mean that they're the right thing to use in all situations. Try to think of when, you know, if you're in one of those bigger buck states, low pressure, you might be able to get away with more of these and they might be a lot more effective. I have a friend down in Iowa that called over a 200 incher that he was hoping for. He was on the wrong food plot. And so his name's Corey, but Corey rattled this buck he gets a cell phone picture of the buck way over on another food plot, rattles, the thing came over. I can't remember if he was hunting in Iowa or Kansas or Nebraska. He's got properties down there, but buck came over, he ended up getting a shot. He called that with those rattling antlers from a quarter mile away. That buck came out on that food plot, aggressive, really looking around. So there's a time and a place for everything. And lastly, what I'll leave you with is, and there's other things you can do, the buck growls and things, and I think they do have their place. Think about if it's louder and it appears more aggressive in nature, like a snort wheeze or a growl, there's more bucks that you could potentially spook with it. They were growling last year when those deer were running from that area and spooking deer, and that was, you know, kind of a growl, rattling, grunting, snort wheezing, all kinds of things. They probably saw a nice buck out in the field 300 yards and throwing every can in there, every tool in the book at it. But what I never leave the truck without is a grunt call. A grunt call is something that I've rarely seen a deer spooked by a grunt call. I suppose there's some young bucks sometimes that if you use a deeper, aggressive, long growl, maybe tending growl, where it's that longer grunt, that they might be spooked by. But what I find is, and this has worked for us several different times, is, and this is, I think Dylan we were trying to talk about this, I think this is a True Talker from a ways back. This has been my favorite grunt call of all time. It's a rubber coated tube. It's got a good deep sound. I blew it a couple times before we started here, but I like this one a lot, this grunt call. It seems like a natural, it doesn't have that plasticky noise like some grunt calls do. So I look for more of a rubber coated, something that has a deeper one. I have another one that Dylan makes fun of. I think I used that in Ohio. It didn't sound very good. So it's like one of those, I go into a sporting goods store and buy it where we're somewhere, and then I go out in the woods and blow it a few times and think, this is the last time I use that. Anyways, I like this one. This is something that fits in my grunt tube. It's always in my grunt tube. I try to bring this 100% of the time. It fits in my hand warmer tube. So this fits and slides right in there. Easy to hold. It's always there. I feel naked in the woods if I don't have it, because we've had a lot of bucks that have gone by us very quiet. They've gone down below us, 30, 40 yards, and they've slipped by. and they're really just seeking. They're looking for does, they're looking for action. They're a mature buck. Been able to just take and just a really low grunt. And if their head snaps our way, you stop. They've already heard you. They already know something's our way. And kind of imagine that buck, he's looking, it's kind of his territory. He feels pretty tough. And especially like a buck, this aggressive one right here. Let's say he walks by, he's 30, 40 yards past you. You can safely turn and grunt. And he hears that and he wonders, you know, who was there? What other buck is in his spot? And that can go for if you're near his bedding area and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, you know he's bedded nearby, or you just give a little soft grunt. Think about that when you give that and it's quiet and you know that any buck within, and they're not going to hear it 200 yards away, but they're going to hear it within 50, 70 yards depending on the wind. I like to just give one little grunt, put it back in my hand warmer tube, and if he's looking, don't do it again. A lot of times he comes back on a string looking for who's in the area. If he looks, you grunt again. He looks, you grunt again. Then a lot of times he knows something's out of place. He might even pick that sound up in the trees instead of on the ground. They have real good directional hearing. So grunt tube, although I don't bring anything else, sometimes I have to admit I have tried to snort wheeze, you know, a buck in, and it has worked. Special occasions. I have rattled bucks in. I don't do it most of the time because there's most areas I'm hunting they can get downwind to me. Don't prefer decoys too much. I will use the bleat in the can. I'll bring that out sometimes, but number one call in my book, it's something you can always bring to the woods. You can always bring it because if a buck is close, I find a high level of engagement with that buck, and something that you're not going to spook deer with on a regular basis, if at all. Something easily that you can put in your pocket. If you have a hand warmer tube like I use, you can throw it in there. And it's my favorite deer call going into this hunting season. You can bet from opening day to the end of the season, no matter where I'm hunting, this will be on me. And I'll admit I'll use it a few times this season. May even call a big buck back with it, and that's what a lot of times happens. Again, you make this call in their little window, in their little world, and they want to know who is there. And whether they come in shy or aggressive, I find it works for just about every buck type. Try it this season. Make sure you always have one of these on you when you go deer hunting this fall.